I'm Matt Hayes. I haven't got much in common with Barbara Kijewski, really. She's German and I'm English. She's a girl, I'm a boy. She's quite young and I'm, I suppose, a bit oldish. But we both share a passion for fishing. And that's why we've decided to go on the ultimate fishing road trip together to Ontario.
Welcome to French River, guys.
Matt,
I'm Steve.
this is
Hi
Matt.
Steve, nice to meet you.
Pleasure is all mine.
Thank you.
So now we drive to the lodge or what?
Yeah.
With the boat?
The penultimate leg of our amazing Ontario road trip adventure brought us to the First Nation Doki Reserve, where we made the short boat journey to Chaudier Lodge. The famous camp is perfectly situated on the historic French River, close to Lake Nipissing, and it's home to some legendary predators, including record-breaking muskie. Our target species for the short stay was one of North America's most iconic and prized fish, the bass. To help us track them down, we teamed up with Chaudier owner, experienced guide and driver of a very fast boat, Steve Niedzwiecki.
Can't wait to get on the water, man.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Oh,
Very nice.
yes, sir.
Wonderful.
So Matt's fishing with a rubber worm style bait. It's a 5-inch, and what this bait is doing is replicating a dead or injured minnow, and we're casting them out, letting them drop nice and slow and sit on the bottom. We're basically dead sticking it. So we let it sit there, and the fish hear and see these baits drop. They'll come over, they pick them up, and as we fish that bait, when we think it's on the bottom, you slowly lift it up off the bottom, you drop your slack line, and you pick up your slack line. That gives that bait time to settle again. You pick it up, you let it settle, and those fish will come up and they'll pick it up. And when you feel that fish, you don't need to set the hook right away because they're eating it. It's not a reaction style bait. This bait is a bait that they pick up this rubber worm. It's impregnated with sea salt, which has the same enzymes as blood, and they eat it. And you can pick it up and you can feel the fish, and they'll even start to run with it. You pick up the slack line and then you set the hook and you bring in big smallmouth.
Well, that was really interesting actually. I just pitched this rather strange looking slug-like plastic bait towards the rocks, and a fish just dashed out and grabbed it on the drop. Very, very quick bite there. And there's another one behind it, I think, actually.
Did you see him jump out
I
of the
did
water
see,
right
yeah,
after that bait?
yeah.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and there
He's
he
a
is.
little guy, but the big one was behind.
Yeah,
That was cool. Did you see that fish jump
yeah,
out
I
of the
did.
water
I
after
saw
that
it. Yeah,
on the line?
yeah. It was really cool actually. There was another fish in behind it, much bigger one. And what was happening was he could see this large plastic bait hanging out of the fish's mouth, and he wanted this off this fish. He wanted to take it away. So this is a smallmouth bass, yes?
This is a smallmouth bass, and the thing I like the best about the colors is the war paint on the side of his face. Different from a largemouth. You know, the largemouth, they have that black stripe down the side. They're really green, and these guys, when they get big and they're in this tannic stained water, they go right bronze, and we call them big bronze backs. But this guy's a wee guy, so we'll send him back and ask for him to bring on Grandpa.
Good idea. Well, there you go. If you fish with that back at home in that style, I don't think you'd catch much. But for bass, it's just a thing.
So Matt, what we're going to do now, I'm going to take the boat right over to this point here. We're going to fish the inside of that bay and this shoal that comes out. We're going to move fairly quickly, slow enough that you can effectively fish that Senko.
Yep.
And we've got to cover some ground to find some big fish.
Okay.
I search the bass for us, so I make a lot of casts around this area. And when I found that, I would call Matt through there.
Well, my first impression of the fishing is that it's very unusual style actually. The closest we would get to this style of fishing with soft plastic baits like this, especially the worms and the slugs, is probably fishing for big perch. But the bass is one of the world's great sport fish. They're roughly perch size in most cases, but they really can fight. And they're very, very aggressive species when they're in the right mood. They're a super sport fish because they jump. So I'm actually pretty excited about being out here fishing for bass because I haven't fished for them for many years, and this is nice. And talking things through with Steve, what I also like is that the smallmouth bass is a much more moody fish than the largemouth that I'm used to fishing for. So some days you've got to be a lot more subtle and technical about the way you go about fishing for them. There's both species here, and I think that's exciting. And I like the fact that we're working around structure, covering interesting looking bays, and you know, it's almost kind of pick your spot, precision fishing. It's nice.
You know, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm a lucky person here. I've fished with some of the best. Matt and Babs are no different. It's really a pleasure to come out and fish with people that know what they're doing, and I love being out here with them, and it's fantastic. And really, the things that they're doing here aren't much different than the things that they're used to. And an angler is an angler, and these guys got it.
Sorry, they're so crazy. I had a follower until the boat, and they walk like crazy, so like a squirrel, like me when I drank too much coffee. It's so cool. Sorry.
I think Babs is a little crazy, but it's fantastic. I love her. She gives hugs, and it's awesome. And she's a fantastic angler. She throws that crankbait around like Roland Martin.
Matt, throw directly there. There.
No, I've got no gear.
Oh,
Calm down,
that's
Babs.
Totally crazy. Oh, look at that fish.
Good girl, Babs. There we go. That's a better point. We're getting there.
All right,
No.
Very good. Yeah, it's a crazy fish. What's that?
What's that hook? Here, that's it. You grab him by the... There you go.
Look at that. Ooh. It's a fish like me when I drink too much coffee. So this area is really shallow, and I see the weed on the ground. This is the best situation to use a spinnerbait.
What we're fishing right here is a small bay. The depth drops off very quickly, and it comes up into about a 12-foot shelf and then 6 feet back in the bay and drops into 60 feet quick. And right now we're fishing those shelf spots. The fish will be sitting up, the active fish that we're looking for with this style of fishing are sitting up in the shallower shelves in front of that deep drop. And I'm just positioning this boat in the wind so that Matt can effectively fish that Senko worm in those areas. It's very important when you're out fishing to know how to call fish. And basically what you need to do is you need to look to the spot where you know there's fish and you say, "Here, fishy, fishy, fish it." That's all you need, right there.
Come on. Yeah, fishy, 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 fishy.
Okay guys, last cast and we go around the corner, okay?
Oh, what's that? I have no idea what kind of fish it is. I'm so excited. Oh, it's a pike. Woo!
Muskie.
It's a muskie. Oh, no. Did you see that? It was a muskie. And it's... Oh. But I saw the bait was only in front of the mouth, and yeah, it will fall out, so no problem. Ooh, muskie are here. Matt, you take the muskie rod.
We've just changed tactics just for a few minutes while we're over these structures. It's interesting that they're not producing any bass. Babs had an encounter with a muskie, so we've just got the muskie rods out just for a few casts in case there are other muskie hanging around the same area, because the lack of bass is a little bit conspicuous. And of course, when there's big predatory fish like muskie around, then the smaller fish are going to get out the way. So the presence of pike and muskie could be the reason why the bass are not on these nice rock piles that we're fishing now. So we're just going to make a few casts and then we'll go back on plan if this doesn't produce anything.
We've got enough casts on this structure here that I'm concerned that, number one, our strike zone is small, and number two, Babs had that big muskie here, so when there's big predatory fish, all of the others decide to leave, and I think that's what's happened here.
One thing I can't understand about the North American system is the reel handle's always on the wrong side.
Yeah, I think the toilet water spins the wrong direction in this country too.
Yes, I've noticed that. I'm just wondering what happens if I get a fish with this cack-handed reel, whether it'll feel right at all. I don't think it will.
Just flip it upside down and use it like a kid.
Good answer.
This isn't right. The toilet flush go on the other side of the earth, like in Australia. And Europe and Canada is the same direction.
Yeah, Matt just had a bump, and a lot of times with those worms, you'll get smaller panfish like perch or bluegill, and they'll come up and it feels like a machine gun, like a pop, 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 pop. Where bass, they pick it up and they start to swim away with it. So it's more of a steady weight that you feel rather than that biting feel. So you can really tell the difference between panfish and the bass that we're looking for.
Yeah, I got one. It's gone. It was a pike again. You can feel it. You can feel it in the rod. So it was the head shakes from the pike like this in the water, and then my bait flow away.
Well, I've just been berating, casting out this rather ridiculous slug, and just to prove me wrong, I felt a small bump on the line and there's a nice fish on the end. Now I'm winding with the wrong hand, everybody. I'm actually winding with the right hand, which feels very, very different to me. But nonetheless, here's the fish.
There we go. There, that's a good
largemouth.
largemouth. Yeah, he's not bad, and that's exactly the way you hook him, right in the beak, right up top there. He was going nowhere.
Can you explain the difference, Steve, just for us
Look the mouth.
layman
So
about
this largemouth, first of all, the big difference is the size of their mouth, right? But also the largemouth don't have that war paint as the same like the smallmouth, and they've got this lateral line. It's a dark line, and they're beautiful green color with a nice pearl belly. And boy, oh boy, I love these fish. You know, and that's a decent size. He's fat. He's feeding. You see, he's got a big fat belly on the bottom there. But you know, they're and they fight fantastically.
Well, a few years ago, everyone had a Billy Big Mouth bass on the wall, and when you walked in the room, it went do 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 do. Don't worry, and it was based on exactly this fish, the largemouth bass. Lovely.
Matt, it looks a little bit like the black bass in America with the point here on the side, and the mouth has the same side. Great.
That's
Good catch.
Exactly what it is. Okay, let's put him back. Well, I wasn't a huge fan of the slug fishing at the start because it was very difficult to get a feeling with so much wind. Effectively, you're free lining them, and when it's windy, it's a huge bow in your line, and the idea is to let them sink down to the bottom, and the bass will just dash in and grab them, and you kind of move them back to the boat fairly steadily. But actually, when you really get into it, it's really, really subtle, and it's all about touch and finesse and contact with what's on the end of your line. So it's almost a hybrid with some of the bait fishing I've done for coarse fish back at home. I'm using an artificial lure, but I'm just trying to stay in touch with it and just feeling for the little knocks and pulls that tell me a fish has run in and grabbed it, and then just tightening up, feeling the fish is there, and then setting the hook. So actually it really is quite, see, that's tightened up there now, but it wasn't a fish. But you've got to check everything out. See, that was a piece of weed that time. I knew that all along, obviously. But it's interesting. I've not fished as slowly as this with lures before. Normally, when you're lure fishing, it's all very frantic, and as you probably noticed at the front end of the boat. It is all very quick and active, and you're covering a lot of water. But with this, it's all about precision, throwing it to target areas and just working it as carefully as you can. It's very subtle, and it's growing on me.
Matt, why don't you try one of these here? It's a Gary Yamamoto Senko, and we can rig them up weedless, so when you toss them out, we're not going to get hung up. Wacky is fantastic, but to rig it weedless, as you can see on this wide gap hook, for those largemouth, when they come and they grab that right there like that, it gives so much room in behind the hook point for you to jam that hook in good.
Crazy fish. Yippee! Give me a little landing net, please. Yeah. Here we are. Here we go!
Wow, and look at the muskie.
Been
Look
hit
at
by
that.
a muskie, look.
Oh!
Look at the teeth marks in the side of that fish.
Oh no! But you know, fish are amazing. In 1 week, this is close and healthy.
Babs, that's unbelievable. That was a massive fish that took chunks out of the side. And these predator fish, they don't have teeth like barracuda. They've just got long teeth there, and it just tore. So that was a massive fish.
I feel, Babs, I honestly didn't know that I'd thrown it into the place where you got a bite. Honestly, I didn't.
There we go. That's a better one. Hey, we're starting to get there.
Sorry, Babs.
That's a beauty. Oh, you don't be sorry. That's the best part about Senkos. You can so easily get in and grab a fish. As soon as you see, the other thing, we call it telegraphing. Whenever you're fishing in weeds, if you see those weeds move and you see where fish are scooting through those weeds, if you throw those Senkos to anywhere around where they are, they'll come and eat them. And that's a good heavy fish. Man, look at how fat he is.
Man stole my fish. I had first a hook and then he threw directly there to the place where I had the bite, and then he stole my fish. That's not really kind, but I'm happy for man. It was a wonderful fish. Great. I will catch a bigger one.
Well, I've decided to take a bit of a break from the slug fishing and try and catch one the hard way. It's all rather too easy, so I'm gonna see if I can catch one on the fly on this popper here. That'd be a really cool way to catch one of these bass. I've got a fly which looks like a frog, and it makes a real popping sound as it comes across the surface, and I'm just hoping that it'll pull one of these bass up and they'll come and smash it straight off the top. One caught like that would be worth 10 caught on the bottom.
Make selfie with the fish.
There he is. See him?
Yeah.
This ball behind it again. Not a big one, but it's one right off the surface. How about that? And that is the difference between sport fishing, catching a little fish like that on a method that you really enjoy, and just filling the boat. For me, the nice thing about fishing is that you can decide on what terms you want your sport. You can decide if you just want to catch lots and lots of fish, maybe on bait or on a lure. And if that's what floats your boat, it's great. But if you want to change things around a little bit and have some fun, try different challenging ways, you can do that too. It's just different strokes for different folks. And I've been around the world, caught lots and lots and lots of fish. And when I've had a few on one method, sometimes I think, now what's the most difficult or most exciting way I could catch these fish? And sometimes you don't catch fish that are quite as big, but it's a real challenge to try and catch fish off the surface on a fly, for example. And that's what really gets me excited these days, is just enjoying the sport on my own terms.
Oh, what's going on? Did you see that? This is lots of fun. And look at that. He ate my worm. But I think I can catch more fish with this piece of worm.
Yep, that was a fish. Yep, got him. It's a little pike after all that. Little baby pike. Right in the middle of the weed bed. A little baby pike there, just lying among the lily pads. And he thought that was a frog just popping over the top of him. He couldn't resist it. Well, that's it, last cast, but it's been an absolutely fantastic day. We've caught lots of fish and finished it off with a couple of bass off the surface on a popper, which you can't beat that really. Magic. Well, we're fishing on the French River system, and this is Dave Sproul. Dave knows a great deal about the history of this area, but in order to make the whole thing a little bit more exotic, we're going to play at being bourgeoisie with a Voyager crew in our own canoe. So Dave, we're actually here now on the French River, but why is it called the French River?
Well, for hundreds of years, this was the place that the French came out into the Great Lakes. So the native people named it the French River because that's where the French were coming from.
And it's actually quite a significant place in the history of the colonisation of Canada, isn't it?
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
Well, this is the first designated Canadian Heritage River in the Canadian Heritage River system for Canada. And it was because of the natural and cultural heritage values that are here and the recreational values. This, you could say, was the river that made Canada. Canada was built by the use of the canoe, the fur trade, and it was built on the backs of the voyageurs who carried those goods across the portages and portaged these canoes.
Now, before we get into that journey, because I mean that's fascinating in itself, it's a special year as well.
That's right. So 2015 is the 400th anniversary of Samuel de Champlain's passage through the French River to Huronia on the Great Lakes.
So let's just look at Champlain's achievement. We're here in a canoe now, being paddled along by people who are all incredibly enthusiastic and doing it for a nice day out. But that was serious business, and of course it was an untamed landscape.
That's right. Champlain and his group were the first Europeans to reach the Great Lakes. Nobody knew that the Great Lakes existed before he got there. He was guided by the Huron and the Algonquin peoples, and they had, mastered the canoe, millennia before. His discovery of the Great Lakes opened up a whole new era of exploration, which eventually led to the formation of Canada.
And of course industry.
Yes. Well, he's called the father of New France, but you could call him the grandfather of Canada because he had a lot of influence in that. He developed the fur trade, cemented the relationships and partnerships with the First Nations that traded with him, and the fur trade basically paid for the establishment of New France and eventually Canada. So if we were actually the bourgeois, the partners of the fur trading company, and we'd be in the middle of the canoe, we wouldn't be paddling, we'd be looking at the scenery and writing, and these fellows would all be doing the hard work. And then when we got to the shore, they would carry us so we didn't get wet.
Well, I think it's a good idea, and it's a tradition we should revive. But what about these guys dressed up here? You said some of them are called the grunters or something.
Yeah, so the person at the bow is important because they guide the canoe through the...
That's Babs, so we're in trouble. Yeah.
Through the white water. The person at the back of the canoe is in charge of the whole canoe, and they're the gouvernail, or the governor. The people in between are the milieu, the many, and they're the grunts of the fur trade. They haul the gear, they paddle the hardest, day in, day out, 16 hours a day kind of thing. And they're usually the untrained, unskilled voyageurs.
The unwashed.
They'd be unwashed for sure.
They would certainly be unwashed. And let me tell you this, with Barbara Kijewski at the front of this canoe, we may well discover a new continent very soon because of coordination.
Kijewski, not Kijewski. You always say it wrong. It's Babs Kijewski.
Anyway, we probably will discover China. And this is the French River today, and of course Champlain would have made his way along this river by canoe. He probably wasn't paddling, but just imagine a dozen canoes making their way gently along here on that journey of discovery. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating, this story of the map, and Dave has actually brought me along now to the visitor centre where we're going to take a look at a representation of that map and a couple of other things as well. So this is a representation of the map that Champlain created, taken from the original map in 1632.
That's right.
It's pretty detailed. How accurate is it?
Well, he didn't have the navigational instruments that they have today, and certainly not satellite, but for its time it was very accurate. And he took information that he gathered from other maps like Hudson's Bay, and the Aboriginal people's knowledge of the landscape as well. He incorporated all that in together, as well as his own travels and his own sort of instrumentation and survey.
Of course, we imagine him making all these wrong turns, so he'd go up the wrong side river or something and start again, but he would have been working with the Aboriginal people, so it would have been pretty direct for him, I guess.
That's right. They didn't know where they were going. They had no idea that the Great Lakes existed here. So they went with the Algonquin and Huron guides who knew this like the back of their hand.
There's some pretty amazing detail on the map, which is typical of that time. They like to illustrate their adventures, but there's some very, very strange creatures illustrated on here.
Yeah, well, it seems to be that tradition of unknown things. You're in an area that's unknown, and maybe it's to impress the audience back in Europe.
And I guess at the end he would have taken this straight to the King of France.
Yes. This was an important map for France. It's interesting that we don't know what he looked like. He's never really, there's no portrait that we know of, but there are rumors that this face in the sun is Champlain.
Fascinating. So over here you've got some quite interesting Voyager stuff, I think. If we could have a look at that.
Yeah.
So this Voyagers Story, I know it's really in the local kind of fabric. Everyone talks about it. It's got a vague interest in history, and it is fascinating. This is kind of a representation of a typical voyageur package of stuff they'd trade, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. This frame here is the size of a 36-foot or 10-meter long Voyager canoe. This was called the Canoe de Maitre, or the Montreal canoe. And it was the standard size of Voyager canoe that would have traveled on the French River. And this load of cargo is actually representative of what would have been in that canoe.
So you'd get all of this
Yeah.
in that canoe,
Yeah.
plus a load of people. The freeboard must have been really
Very low, like 6 inches or less. And they packed that and unpacked it every time they came to a portage.
So they'd be going down the river. They'd have to obviously negotiate a difficult hazard, unpack the canoe, carry the canoe across, repack it.
Yep.
That doesn't sound like the life to me.
But they loved it. It was the life of the voyageur, and you had French-Canadian farm boys leaving the farm to join the fur trade.
For a life of adventure.
Life of adventure.
And what were they actually trading?
Well, there's a whole range of goods, all sorts of foodstuffs that were not usual to the First Nations people. Blankets, material to make clothes, a whole range of things.
Yeah.
And it was like the store comes to you.
Well, it's the last morning at Chaudier Lodge and it's an absolute cracker at the moment. Autumn's arrived, but the sun's out. And this is a last chance for me to try and catch a muskie while I'm in Ontario. The muskie, of course, is a species of pike. They call it the fish of 10,000 casts because you've got to be pretty lucky to drop your lure on the nose of one. But if you do, it's one of those fish of a lifetime. And I'm going to give it one last go before I leave Ontario. To help me, I've got the best muskie guide at the lodge. His name's Pete, and we're going for a nice day out. Morning.
Morning, bud. How are you?
How are you, Pete? Yeah, good, thanks. Looking forward to it. Thank you. I've brought a bit of fly gear with me.
So comfy.
Yeah.
Let's go try and wrangle up some muskies.
Yeah, nice day.
Looks good. Okay, so using my sonar here, I've come to a location where it's got a combination of structures and depths. Judging by the wind today, in my opinion, we've got a situation where bait fish will be holding onto that structure, which creates an opportunity for the fish that we're fishing for today to hunt in those areas where there's an accumulation of food for them. So like I say, we've got a combination of structure, depth, and a few variables going down below. And we're just trying to present a good meal option for these fish in these circumstances in this location.
Well, the first thing I've noticed today is the nip in the air. Autumn's definitely arrived. There's a cold north wind blowing. But the interesting thing for me is that this is definitely the macho stuff. We're fishing for the biggest of the freshwater pike species, the muskie. It's a legendary fish. They grow to huge sizes. And of course the fish of your dreams is a 50-inch muskie. Now, the gear that I'm using here that Pete's provided me with leaves nothing to chance. The rod's a really powerful rod for casting these huge baits. We've got really strong braid on here, probably 80 or 120 pounds braided line, big strong hooks, big lures. You know, this is the sort of stuff that you fish for monsters with.
So I think, Matt, we fished this spot out in its entirety. I think we didn't see no action here, which is not a big deal, but I think we'll press on to maybe some different areas where I think they might be hiding out.
Well, we've been casting now for, I don't know, 3.5 hours, and it's actually quite hard work with all this heavy duty stuff. One of the great things about musky fishing is that the lures are so big and bright and bold, and they've got great names as well. But we've been fishing with this twin-bladed bucktail. Looks a little bit like Liberace, that one, with all the spangly stuff on it. But now we're going to go for a bulldog, which is a big rubber lure, another casting lure. Look at the state of that thing. You wouldn't want that for a wart on the end of your nose, would you? But they really work. So why are we changing over, Pete?
Basically just depth. We want to try and get the baits into a deeper water column. It's just in this area marking a lot of bait fish and in a deeper section of the river. So we're going to try and present something different to them.
Okay, well, let's give it a go. The muskie is a really interesting fish for me. It's one of those fish which has got a kind of iconic status. It's a legendary fish, and there aren't many of those in the world. It's not necessarily about size. I think it's scarcity and degree of difficulty of capture. I mean, in the UK, back in the sort of 70s and the 80s, before the world and his wife started carp fishing, people spoke about carp like that because they were considered to be quite rare and so difficult to catch. I've come across it in the saltwater flats fishing scene, when you've saltwater fly fishing on, you know, very shallow water in places like Cuba and the South Americas, the Caribbean, the Florida Keys. There's a fish there called a permit, which is really difficult to catch on a fly, and that's got this kind of legendary status. And these are the sort of fish that people speak about in hushed tones and with reverence, and something that the mere mortal can only really dream about. And I think the muskie for me is definitely a fish that has got that status and that pedigree about it. Well, time for just a few last casts now. It's been a really tough day. We've covered a huge amount of water, some of Pete's best and secret spots, done an awful lot of casting. It is an old cliche that it's the fish of 10,000 casts, but today they've lived up to their name. We haven't even had a follow. We've fished hard. I've been casting all day, and let me tell you, there are not many fish that leave you feeling like you've had a workout at the end of a day's fishing, but with this really heavy duty gear and all this cranking, I'll sleep well tonight, that's for sure. I'm not too downhearted. This is a fish I'd love to catch, and I think one day I'm going to come back and make sure that I bring one to the boat. And I guess you must get days like this, Pete.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, Matt. And the thing is, today especially, we're dealing with terrible cold front conditions. I mean, the water temperatures have dropped in the past 2 days 5 degrees or more. Steady decline in temperature. So yeah, it's going to create a tougher avenue of fishing and trying to raise these fish out of wherever they're hiding. But you know, you have those moments, but then you also have those positive moments where, like you say, you're intrigued by the fish, and you get these magical moments where you have days where you can't keep them off your line, and they're so fun. Once you see one follow or hit boat side, or even from any distance jumping out of the water, you're hooked. You're hooked for life. They're a special breed of fish, and hopefully, yeah, you'll come back and we'll eventually get you on one in some better conditions.
Well, Pete, I think that's just about it. Nothing to show for it, but hey, I mean, I've always felt that the fish of your imagination are quite often more powerful than the fish you've actually caught. And I know, I've been fishing long enough to know that you've put me on some really good spots today. So thanks for a great day. And you've inspired me.
Perfect, come on back.
I will.
The French River and Lake Nipissing are steeped in history. Understanding its past was as rewarding as discovering how rich its waters are. There are great numbers of bass, pike, walleye and muskie, and our guide Steve was able to read the waters and find the feeding grounds for the many predators. And he did it in a super fast boat. We are nearing the end of our great adventure, but there are still fish to be caught and challenges to be met. Ontario, we love you.